Thanks for listening to the Nice podcast. I am available to deliver keynote presentations and workshops for your company or for your conference. Reach out to me, DaveDelaneySpeaks.com, or email me and we can talk. Now on with the show.
Hey there, it's Jason with the Marketing Podcast Network. Real quick, I want to make sure you know that the world's leading B2B Marketing Expo is returning to the Los Angeles Convention Center on March 21st and 22nd. It's high time we got back together to learn, see the latest technologies and solutions, and network, right? Join thousands of marketing professionals just like you to learn from over 250 industry expert speakers, educational masterclasses, and over 300 exhibitors. And this year, your ticket also gets you into the Sales Innovation Expo and the Marketing and Advertising Expo. So it's like 3 conferences in one. It's March 21st and 22nd at the Los Angeles Convention Center. Go to b2bmarketingexpo.us to register. That's b2bmarketingexpo.us. The Marketing Podcast Network is a proud partner of the B2B Marketing Expo for 2023. We'll see you in LA.
Nice.
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 Nice. Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice with Dave Delaney.
Well, hey there, Nice Maker. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Nice Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. Today, I'm going to try something a little different than usual. I'm going to share an interview with me, not my interview, but rather someone else's interview. And that person is the one and only Scott Monty. Now, you can find the notes from this podcast episode at timeless.zealous.com. And you can also find Scott's newsletter at scottmonty.com, which I highly recommend you check out. And you'll soon see why. Scott is awesome. And he agreed that it would be fun for me to share his podcast interview with me on my feed here with you today. So that's what you are about to hear. Now, I should note that the quality on the microphone for me isn't quite as good as the sound of Scott, but it will be fine. And Scott's a pro, so you'll soon understand why. Now, we spoke at length about kindness, about the ROI of Nice, how to actively listen. I shared the 3 steps of networking nicely. We talked about how leaders can be nicer. We talked about productivity tips, the power of journaling, empathy, and even Mr. Rogers and Jesus have cameos in this episode. So it's a great one. And hey, it's Easter. So that's good timing there, isn't it? So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Nice Podcast with Scott Monty.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Timeless Leadership, where we explore principles and virtues that accompany successful and admirable leaders. I'm Scott Monty. If you aren't yet subscribed to the Timeless and Timely newsletter, where I regularly write about these topics, please do so at scottmonty.com. This week, we are exploring kindness. Have you noticed the admiration we give to leaders who are cutthroat and so-called killers? Legendary General Electric CEO Jack Welch was known as Neutron Jack, and Oracle's Larry Ellison was once described as, quote, a modern-day Genghis Khan. It's as if we take the base elements of humanity from a time when we were hunters and apply it to business and leadership. But leadership isn't only about the outcomes. It's about how you get there. It isn't about the title you have, but it's how you treat people along the way. As the saying goes, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. Leaders are human, and they struggle with the challenges that life brings, just like anyone else. Fred Rogers observed, mutually caring relationships require kindness, patience, tolerance, optimism, joy in the other's achievements, confidence in oneself, and the ability to give without undue thought of gain. We need to accept the fact that it's not in the power of any human being to provide all the things all the time. For any of us, mutually caring relationships will also include some measure of unkindness and impatience, intolerance, pessimism, envy, self-doubt, and disappointment. Being nice can seem like a struggle at times. How can leaders manage to be nice at the same time they take on crises and motivate their teams and push for results? Well, we've got someone to help us figure that out. Who's the nicest person you know? If you don't know Dave Delaney yet, then that answer may change by the end of this show. Dave is a speaker, corporate trainer, a podcaster, and an author known as a communication connoisseur. He's the creator of the NICE method. He helps fast-growing companies reach their people through comprehensive communication workshops and presentations. Dave works with brands like Google, FedEx, LinkedIn, and UPS. He's an American Marketing Association Award winner and has appeared in USA Today, Entrepreneur, Inc., Fortune, and Billboard magazine. His acclaimed book, New Business Networking, explores online and offline tools, tips, and techniques to grow and nurture your professional network for your business and career by communicating the nice way. Dave was born and raised in Toronto and lives in Nashville. And he's an all-around nice guy. Dave, welcome to Timeless Leadership.
Scott, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here in our little fireside chat.
Absolutely. So I have to start off, Dave, by asking you, are you nice simply because you're Canadian?
I'm nice with the Queen's English. I like to add a lot of U's to words.
I like that. I like that. So tell me about this. How did you stumble into creating NICE as part of your brand and as part of your offering as a consultant?
Yeah, it's a great question. For years, I've always focused, on that golden rule, right? Treat people the way you want to be treated. I've clobbered my kids over the head in the nicest way possible, I might add, to remind them of this and how important it is. And I think my mom taught me this at an early age. So I've always set out to treat people the way I want to be treated, to be nice, to be cool, to be a good person. And over the years, I kept having people introduce me as a nice guy or mention, to me in confidence and talk about like, man, nice. That's such a thing. Like I always think of you when I think of nice. And so the more I started thinking about that, the more it made sense to kind of weave into my overall brand and, who I am and what I do as a business owner and entrepreneur.
Yeah. And were there people in your childhood or your education or your early career that stood out as quote unquote nice that you emulated or that you learned something from?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's been many people, and I've written, I read a blog and have written articles about some of these people over the years. Like for example, I went to a camp as a kid, Kilcoo Camp in southern Ontario, I guess north of Toronto. And when the owner of the camp, who ran the camp, he passed away, and I went down to they were having a service for him in this large cathedral in downtown Toronto, St. James Cathedral, and I went down to kind of just went down by myself just to sort of say goodbye, I guess, and it was so packed that they had to have like overflow tents outside with speakers so that and this is the largest cathedral in Toronto, I might add. And it dawned on me very early on, I'm like, wow, I would love to have this lasting impression on this many people. Like to have a career where you affect this many people is just incredible. And actually, his son, David Latimer, now runs the camp, and I will be interviewing him on my podcast soon, which is going to be very interesting because I haven't really talked to him since I was a kid. So that's going to be a fun conversation.
That's like the full circle of nice.
Right. Yeah. Bring it back around. I'll tell you another very quick story, which is a long story, but I'll tell you the short version is if any of the listeners here are familiar with blues music, or if they play guitar, or if they know the Telecaster, the master of the Telecaster was a blues artist named Albert Collins, and otherwise known as the Iceman. And this is a longer story, but the short version is that he came to Toronto, and he was my number one living blues favorite. And I went to go see him live and introduced myself to him as he was getting off his tour bus. He brought me backstage. He brought my friends backstage. We all hung out with the band. And then he brought me on the road to the next gig. And I'm 18. I'm like hanging out in the tour bus. We're driving. He's driving his own tour bus. And so I wrote a blog post called 6 Life Lessons from a Living Blues Legend, all about, the things I learned. And as the more people that I met over the years who had similar interactions with Albert Collins, they all said he was just the nicest guy and an amazing blues artist, guitar player and singer as well.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible. I mean, it's a story that stayed with you for years and years. I mean, you're still telling it today.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was kind of a dream come true to meet one of your favorite artists, and then he actually invites you to go on the road to the next gig in the tour bus and hang out. And then, the next year when he came back through Toronto, he called me and said, "I'm coming back through. Do you want to help me out again?" And the way I helped him out, he taught me how. Albert Collins famously played this Telecaster, but he always played with it with a wire. He didn't like the radio, the wireless. But he was known for sometimes getting really carried away with this chord where he would play in the audience. He'd play a solo, but there were times when I think there was a story in Chicago where he exited during a guitar solo, exited the club, went next door, ordered a slice of pizza, and then walked back as he was playing his solo with hundreds of feet of patch cord behind him. And so he taught me how to carry the cord like a lasso kind of behind him as he was doing the solos in the audience. And so I had all these people patting my back like I was in the band or something. And it was, I'm 18, 19, something like that. It was just absolutely amazing. So
that's fantastic.
But he was a very giving guy and just super, super nice.
Well, this is interesting because a lot of times when people say, well, I want to act kind, I want to act nice, in some manner of thinking, they may be trying to go for the return. In other words, they're being nice to someone, so someone will be nice to them back. And
right.
In his case, what did he have to gain by showing you that kindness?
It's a great question. I think, there were other musicians who I don't know if they reciprocated or not. But he was famous for bringing on other young guitar players or up and coming guitar players on stage to play with him. He even offered me to come up and play, even though I didn't play at the time. I suppose that could have changed my career had I played.
Maybe he could have taught you on stage.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I think it was just a matter of not one thing I've always focused on is also not forgetting my roots and understanding kind of where I've come from in my own career. And I think for him, I think it was just a matter of the community of music and giving back and being supportive of other people, no matter what level they were in their career. I mean, Albert Collins, to anybody who knows blues or knows guitar, rock or blues, they know Albert Collins. But to those who don't know, if you know blues, I say, you would probably, and you don't know any blues, you would probably just say B.B. King. That name would come to mind. Sure. And he was sort of just under B.B. King in a sense, but they played a lot together. And so I think, in a weird way, it's sort of beneficial, I guess, in a networking sort of way, that others may reciprocate later. But that's the whole essence of what I talk about and write about with networking. And over on networkingfornicepeople.com, right? The idea of
providing value to other people first and foremost, no matter what, without expecting anything in return. But, call it karma, call it what you like. But I do believe that this thing does, these things, these nice gestures that you can do throughout your career, will come back eventually.
Well, you have a presentation that you give, and it's called the ROI of Nice. Can you take us through what you mean by the ROI of Nice and what some of the principles there are?
Yeah. So the ROI of Nice, I just actually did this for IABC, and I'm doing it again for another IABC chapter at the end of, I think, next month. But the ROI of Nice, the return on investment of being nice, right? This is what it's all about. And it breaks down to 3 S's: self, stakeholders, and society. Now, I'm a sucker for alliteration, so I had to do those 3 S's. But the point of the presentation is what I want people to do when they see it. And I deliver this, by the way, for organizations privately, but I also do it at conferences as keynotes and training. The first S is self, and it's a leadership talk to teach leaders to be nice to themselves. You've got to be able to be nicer to yourself, because if you're a mess, then your team's going to be a mess, and you're not going to be able to give back and support communities at all, because you'll just be a hot mess. So the key thing is to focus on yourself and being nicer to yourself, and then being nicer to the stakeholders in your organization by giving back, by supporting them. And I have methods and examples of this in that presentation. And then finally being nice to society and getting your team members involved, but also yourself, finding ways to give back, whether that's through effective altruism to help, causes across the world, or whether it's or helping, local organizations. Like, for example, I do some LinkedIn work, and I help individuals with their LinkedIn profiles. And in doing that, I give a percentage of all of those earnings to a local food bank. And so for every audit I sell, I give, we provide 100 meals to a food bank. And so, again, it's just an example of how you can give back to your community. So the ROI of Nice is all about focusing on these 3 S's: being nice to yourself, nice to your stakeholders, and then nice to society as a whole.
That's really refreshing to hear. And the way you break it down like that, I think it makes a lot of sense, because when there's not a lot of focus, I think, on self-care. We talk about leaders being emotionally intelligent. And one of the aspects of emotional intelligence, or EQ, is to be self-aware. And in being self-aware, I mean, that, just as you say, that comes by being kind to yourself and treating yourself the way you would want to treat others. I mean, we always talk about treating others the way we'd want to be treated, but we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about how we want to be treated or how we treat ourselves. So I think that's so key.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes back. I mean, if you want to take it back, we do talk about things historical here. The teachings of Jesus, from the New Testament, it's a matter of loving yourself as you love your neighbor, or loving your neighbor as you love yourself. So it's a very kind of core principle that humanity has known for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, Dave, based on your concept of the ROI of Nice, and I know you have an acronym there. Listen. What does listen stand for to you?
Listen. So when I speak about listening, one of the most important. So I have co-hosted a couple of unconferences over the years, and I co-founded a couple of unconferences over the years, and then I created 2 monthly networking events that I ran for years as well. And so in doing that, I got to observe the way people communicated with one another a lot in a cocktail sort of setting, and so I observed this, but then I also started focusing on this. And as I wrote my book is called New Business Networking. I actually shared this. This is something I came along to, and it was by, and I'm trying to think, I believe it was like the British Nursing Association.
Okay.
Had this acronym for listen, and it stands for the L in listen stands for looking interested. So that means that when you speak to somebody, looking them in the eyes. Now, a lot of what I do and what we do these days is online. So a variation of that is looking at the web camera, right? And there's I stole from David Burkus, I believe, who's a great body language and speaker as well, and a peer, where you stick a Post-it note upside down so the sticky part is above your webcam that has a smiley face on it. So that you're looking at that smiley face as you're speaking to somebody on a web conference, because you want to be looking at their face,
Sure.
making that eye-to-eye connection. So the L stands for looking interested. And that means looking them in the eyes. It means responding. The I stands for involve yourself by responding. And that might mean, nodding. It might mean smiling. It might mean, asking some follow-up questions. So listen. So the L is look interested. The I is involve yourself. The S is stay on target. And the target, when you speak to somebody, you picture a target on them, not in like a violent way, a bullseye. But the idea here is the target is on the person you are speaking with. So a good example of this is that, and we've all done this, where you go to an event. Remember when we did that? You go to an event and you're speaking to somebody and you leave the event, and afterwards you think, gosh, that woman that I met tonight was great. I really liked her a lot. What was her name again? Well, she worked, where did she work? Where was she from? She was from, and you realize you don't remember anything about her, but you really liked her. And what you realize is the reason why you really liked her is because she let you do the bulk of the talking. And when you do the bulk of the talking, so the idea here is the target is on the person you're speaking with, and let them do the bulk of the talking. And you can do that by asking open-ended follow-up questions like, how did that make you feel? Or what did you do next? Or, something like that. And then where am I at? The E is empower that person. And so, make them feel great. And then finally, the N is neutralize the feelings. So, and that just means that if they say something that rubs you the wrong way, don't, unless it's something terrible. But I mean, if it's something like, making fun of your local sports team or something, you got to kind of neutralize those feelings and move on. So that's like the listen acronym for actively listening and how you can do that, more effectively.
Yeah, that is profound, Dave. I mean, again, it's a simple mnemonic: listen, looking interested, involving yourself by responding, staying on target, testing your understanding, evaluating the message, neutralizing the feelings.
Yes.
It's not rocket science, is it?
It's not. And when you think about that, and this is the reason why I love doing a talk, like a keynote presentation at a conference, because because I've organized my own over the years, but when a conference planner or meeting planner hires me to deliver this talk, I get the audience empowered enough and informed enough to kind of let their guard down and network effectively, network nicely, as I say. And then new relationships are built. And so when you network effectively and you network nicely at a conference or in a mixer or something, you come away with new relationships. I mean, Scott, you and I met at South by Southwest in 2007, and had we not been just chatting, we wouldn't have met. We may not be connected today. So it is so important that we take the time to meet new people and build those relationships. And when I talk about in networking, or the three key steps of networking, the first is to show up, and that might mean joining a chat like this. It might mean going to an event or a virtual event, but showing up. It's easy to register for something and then not bother go. But when you actually show up, that's the first step. The second step is to follow up, and that means following up with the people that you met, and I have strategies to do that. And then catch up is the third point, which is 6 months later or a year later, when that conference is coming back around, that's a perfect time to reach back out to that person to say, hey, I thought we should catch up before the next conference or before, or if you're going this year, let's make sure to catch up over coffee when we're there in person. So, these are the three important steps to networking.
That's fantastic. Again, with the three, you're like you said it yourself. You're a communication connoisseur. Show up, follow up, and catch up. I love that.
Yes.
Love that. Very easy to remember. Dave, I do remember meeting you at South by. I mean, it was my first time there, so it's very, it was very impressed upon my brain. But I had a secret weapon that you probably recall. One of the ways I made people remember me on that very first visit, there was a guy by the name of Joey Avila, who is known as the accordion guy on Twitter and across the web. And I play the accordion. So I asked Joey if I could borrow his accordion. And he's like, yeah, whatever. And he gave it to me on the sidewalk at South by, right outside of a restaurant. And I started jamming on it. And a little crowd gathered around, and it was fun. It was just one of those unexpected moments. But again, it was different, and it stood out. And it was a nice experience for everyone. And
it sure was. I have the photos to prove it.
I know you do. You're behind that. So I have you to thank for that. So let me ask you this: when you talk about this acronym, LISTEN, looking interested, involving yourself, staying on target, testing your understanding, empowering, and neutralizing.
Yeah.
Why is it that so many people find it so difficult to be nice? We see so much vitriol online. We see people that are on deadlines, that simply want results and bark at employees or team members. Why is it so hard to be nice sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. I think it is, especially living online like most of us do, especially these days, time kind of can go out of the window and just disappear. And so you can, if you're very busy, you can feel like you're scrambling, and just little interruptions here and there can kind of drive you in the wrong direction, into like a negative sort of direction. So I think it's a matter of prioritizing what you're working on, but then also scheduling. And I must admit, you dropped off a little bit there. So, but if I understand the question correctly, I think it's a matter of scheduling time. Like, I think scheduling your time is so important. I do time blocking so that I can work on and focus on different aspects of my business or my personal life. Things like that, and then try to stick to that. The way that I do that is I have a Gmail Google Calendar that I use that has this quote unquote ideal or killer calendar, as I like to call it, where I've blocked off time during every day to specific things. And then what's great about this is you can overlay. So if anyone, if you use Google Calendar, you know that you can turn on and off multiple calendars at any time. So I can visually put my regular work calendar over my killer calendar and see and make sure that I'm scheduling the right things at the right times, if that makes sense. And so this helps me balance my time so that I'm not flying off the handle at somebody who's interrupting me or something like that. So that's one way, if I understand your question correctly.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So being deliberate with yourself, being ruthless with your own time, giving yourself the ability to focus on what you need to, so you don't feel like you're pulled in too many directions. What about when there are things that are outside of our control, where we don't command our own schedule? Do you have any suggestions about how to kind of dig deep within to make sure we're not giving people the short end of the stick or flying off the handle, as it were?
Absolutely. I think, so when I talked about the LISTEN acronym and I mentioned E as empowering, the other side of that I usually talk about is evaluating the message. And what that means is repeating the information so that you're sure that you receive the correct information. And this can really play well to what you asked, because if you evaluate the message, it helps you understand all the steps, and it helps you understand the how time sensitive that thing is. So, for example, if and the example, for some reason years ago when I started delivering this as a keynote, for some reason I used the example of if somebody gave me a box and said, "Hey, Dave," and I have no idea why I used this example. It's bizarre, but anyway, it's kind of random. But if somebody gave me a box and they're like, "Hey, Dave," my boss, let's say, my boss gives me a box and says, "Hey, Dave, I need this box cut into 4 pieces, and I need all the pieces at our New York office by 9 a.m. Monday morning." What you do then when you get that instruction or from someone is to repeat the information. So you say, "So what you're saying is," so you begin, "So what you're saying is you need the box cut into 4 pieces and you need it in New York at our office there 9 a.m. on Monday morning. Is that what you're saying?" And when you say, "So what you're saying is," and "is that what you're saying," especially when you're face to face or even webcam, of course, a few different things happen here. First, the person who is giving you the instruction thinks, "Wow, Dave's paying attention. Good job, Dave. I love this guy. What a nice employee." So your boss feels confident in you because you've repeated the information. But also you get, if you mess it up, if I say, "Oh, I need these 4 pieces in our, Toronto office by 9 a.m. No, New York. By repeating it, you clarify it and you make sure that you've got the right information. But what's interesting too, in the case of saying it out loud, especially, is your brain starts to pick it up. So your brain realizes like, well, hold on, this guy's saying that out loud, so this must be important, so I better listen. And that helps you retain the information to remember exactly what it is that instruction is. So what I'm saying is that when you, is by repeating the information, it helps to make sure that you are clear on the instruction and that the person that gave you that information feels confident that you understand what's needed and also the urgency, and that might mean you asking a follow-up question like, "Okay, yeah, I'll get right to this. When would be the best time that you can expect, that you would want to expect this delivery?" If that makes sense. If that information isn't relayed at the top. So just making sure that you're managing expectations by repeating the information, that will really help you in evaluating the urgency of that message.
That's great. I think when we say these things out loud, when you write a tweet, right? Like you're ready to fire something off at someone. And if you pause and read it back to yourself, you have an opportunity to think, "Wow, I sound like a real a real moron, or a real bad guy."
Yeah.
I don't want to use profanity, but yeah, there's
you do.
right. There's the opportunity to say, "Well, if I were on the receiving end of this, how would that feel,
Yes.
or what would it do to the relationship?" Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was just going to say to that point, like, I think it's very important. I wrote an article a few years ago that was quite popular about understanding, especially as it pertains to social media, is that, these days, maybe to a slightly lesser degree due to bots and things, but typically you are corresponding with a human. And it's important to remember that there is a human on the other side of whatever that correspondence is. There is a human that's receiving that message. And so, yes, as you said, not just proofreading it, but reading it before you actually publish it is an important step. And I'll share a story from the early days of Twitter. I was flying to Seattle to go to a tech conference there. And this is probably 2007 as well, so early days. And I got a Starbucks coffee at the airport, and I had sat down. I was in my chair on the flight. We hadn't even started taxiing yet. I take the last gulp of this coffee, the Starbucks coffee, and it's all coffee grounds.
Ugh.
And I had this woman sitting right next to me, of course, and I kind of coughed it up, like, and it was on my hand. It was really gross. It was just a mouthful of coffee grounds. It was disgusting. And it had sort of spat up on my hand, and it's kind of, on the cup, and it was gross. So I did what every like early social media, whatever you want to call me at the time. But I took a photo of it using TwitPic. There's a little, before Instagram. I took a photo of it and I tweeted it to at Starbucks and say, hey, at Starbucks, something to the effect of like, you may want to retrain your baristas on, how not to have coffee grounds in the cup, or it was something snarky. Mm-hmm. So I get to Seattle, I'm attending this conference, and of course, Starbucks is exhibiting. Starbucks is there as a sponsor. So I go over and introduce myself to the guy standing there for Starbucks, and I said, oh hey, and I wasn't there to complain or anything, but I said, the funny thing happened on the way here, and he looks at my name badge and goes, yeah, Dave, I saw your tweet. I am at Starbucks. And I just sank in I was just
wow.
Like, oh, I'm so sorry for calling you out that way. So again, thinking, keeping in mind that when you do correspond, even with a brand, a logo, this of course is a good argument for using your actual face as the Twitter profile, which by the way, folks, Scott Monty is featured in my book, New Business Networking, because they used Scott used his face when running digital for Ford, so that I knew that when I was talking about Ford or tweeting about Ford, I was tweeting to Scott. And so that is a great way of connecting and humanizing your brand, is having that person there. So
it's a great story, Dave, and thanks for the shout out.
Yeah,
I'm reminded of an old story, and it's a true story about Abraham Lincoln. It was shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg, and he wrote a letter to General George Meade. Now, Meade was not known for being really responsive to Lincoln and Lincoln's wishes in the war, and he was notoriously gun shy, not literally speaking, but he was just very conservative, and Lincoln wanted to end the war as soon as possible, and of course, Gettysburg was a defeat for the Confederates, and Lincoln wanted Meade to pursue General Robert E. Lee and his troops, and Meade didn't. So Lincoln wrote him a letter expressing his profound disappointment, and basically expressing that he had reservations about Meade's leadership ability. And Lincoln took this letter, and he folded it up, and he put it in a drawer, and he never sent it. And for Lincoln, it was a cathartic moment. He needed to get the frustration out in some manner, right? So he put it down on paper. But he knew if he sent that letter, even if he eventually would and did fire Meade, it would destroy the relationship between them. Even though there was a little bit of friction already, he didn't want to completely obliterate what he had there with his team. And I think about that today and how easy it is to fire off that tweet. There was an instance not too many years ago where there was a PR representative who was getting on a flight to Africa, and she wrote something disparaging about HIV. Gets on the plane and, wakes up, gets off the plane, however many, 14 hours later, and Twitter has done what Twitter does, and came right down on her. She lost her job. I mean, she couldn't do anything about it because she made a poor choice instead of pausing and thinking about what would be the kindest choice in that instance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is the power of pausing and slowing down a little bit, and again thinking about I have had an issue with a large major coffee brand, not Starbucks, it's a different one, and have written and deleted a tweet to them over and over again. Okay. Because I keep talking myself out of it. I'm like, well, what's the point? The short version is I was trying to work with a coffee brand to send coffee to a nursing home where my dad resides in Canada, which I can't cross the border, of course, at this time. So I can't even go visit him. So I wanted to buy all the nursing staff, a round of coffee and donuts and things. And I was trying to coordinate this, but anyway, I digress. But I haven't been, created a fuss about it because, what's really the point at the end of the day? So to your point about that, I think pausing and slowing down before you hit publish or send that letter, another powerful thing is to journal. I found this to be extremely rewarding. And it's something that I've picked up again over the last couple of years. I'm not doing it quite as frequently as I'd like, but when you journal, it's kept private to yourself. And so you can just say whatever you want in your journal. And then it's kind of out of your system. And you can rip out the pages and burn them if you want, or you can just keep it and look back at it later. I find that's also really rewarding because, I have journals from like decades ago, and I love looking back at them and realizing whenever I'm feeling kind of crappy about whatever the circumstances are right now with my business or whatever it may be, I can look back at these old journals and realize you know what? I'm okay. Life is actually a lot better than it once was. So, so it helps to put things in perspective. So writing, journaling can really help as well. Just getting it out there, and certainly, not sending that letter is probably a great idea.
Yeah. So, what are your plans with those journals long term?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's a really good question because now that I'm podcasting again, for the longest time I was calling myself a recovering podcaster. But I record a lot of voice memos to myself. When I'm driving, I'll just talk to myself. But for some reason, I'll record it. As a podcaster, it just feels like I can't just talk to myself in the car. That's weird. But if I'm recording it, well, that makes sense. And then I delete the recordings later. And I had a couple of friends that I was telling this to recently who were like, "No, don't delete them. You need to keep them." So I don't know with the old journals. I have no idea what my plans are, if anything.
Well, it may be a tool for the archivists of the future who want to write your biography. Or
yes, maybe.
Or it may be a gift for your kids. When each of my children was born, I bought a journal for each one of them and have been writing in it since that time. Sometimes there's a lapse, but observations, things I want them to know. So it's a written record of what we have, and they can look back, after I'm gone and look through what I've left them. I don't know if yours are a little too personal to go to that level, but having that written record and being able to reflect on it, I think makes us more conscious about the choices that we make today. Yeah.
I love that idea. I once had an idea of writing them as emails and then getting morbid, but not intentionally, not intentionally morbid here, but scheduling the emails to start to deliver once a week, after my demise.
Wow. It's
but that might be kind of creepy.
It's like a Black Mirror episode.
Yeah, I think it was.
Really is.
Or maybe perhaps.
Yeah.
But no, I love your idea. I think that's a great idea. My old journals are probably way too personal. The kids would be like, "Oh, no wonder I have this. No wonder I'm crazy or whatever." Yes.
Dave, I mentioned the term choice because really being nice and kindness, these are choices that we make every single day. When something happens to us or there's an event in the world, the only thing we can control is our reaction to it. And our reaction can be vitriolic. Our reaction can be to embrace it, to pivot, to show love or kindness to others. And it's really, it takes an effort. But the ultimate symbol of kindness, the symbol of leadership kindness, is Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers years ago said when he's in a situation, he asks himself, he stops and he asks himself, what would be the kindest choice? Right? He presents it to himself where he says, I need to make a decision about how I'm going to react. Some way may be kinder than the other, but ultimately, how can I choose the kindest choice? And it's it can be difficult sometimes, just as you've stated before, but ultimately the power rests with each one of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I love that quote. And, and I hope everybody has seen, the different, Mr. Rogers, the different, films. There's a wonderful documentary, that was made. And at the time, the name was it The Neighborhood or something like, I can't remember the name. There's a couple different documentaries about Fred Rogers. And I went to go see it in the theater, and it was just, I guess, maybe 2016, 2017. Politically, things were kind of ugly, and people were very, very divided. And I remember sitting in a crowded movie theater. Remember movie theaters? Anyway, but I remember sitting in that movie theater and just with a bunch of strangers, all from different, political backgrounds, I imagine, and going to the bathroom afterwards, and I'm running into a friend there in the bathroom, and I was like, "Oh, how's it going?" And he's like, "Oh, pretty good," and we're both like wiping our tears from our eyes, and just realizing that it was such a touching movie, but realizing that there was a specific scene in it where the king puppet, I forget his name,
King Friday the 13th.
Yes, thank you. Yes. When he was building a wall, and it was perfectly timed with the politics of the U.S. during that period, and building a wall to lock out everybody, and it really did resonate, with I think a lot of people realized, yeah. But anyway, yes, I love Fred Rogers.
That's great. Well, a quick story for you, and after this story, we'll give the microphone to Eric, who we brought up to the stage. That movie, which was with Tom Hanks, and it was I think it was called "Won't You Be My Neighbor?"
Yes.
Or maybe, well, that may be another one. There's so many Mr. Rogers things popping in the public lately. But the one you're talking about, it was based on the relationship that Mr. Rogers struck up with Tom Junod from Esquire magazine.
The one...
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. You dropped off there. The one I was talking about was actually a documentary. But I know the one you're talking about, and that was also an amazing film.
Yeah, so I think that is "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" That's the documentary.
Got it. Yes.
The one with Tom Hanks was the one with Tom Junod, who is a journalist. He did a really strong piece about Mr. Rogers in Esquire magazine in 1998, I think, and it was called "Can You Say Hero?" And there's one excerpt out of that I want to share because again, kindness and being nice, it's all about making choices. And Mr. Rogers made a number of choices in this particular instance. He was born with cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy is something that happens to the brain. It means you can think, but sometimes can't walk or even talk. This boy had a very bad case of cerebral palsy, and when he was still a little boy, some of the people entrusted to take care of him took advantage of him instead and did things to him that made him think he was a very bad little boy. Because only a bad little boy would have to live with the things he had to live with. In fact, when the little boy grew up to be a teenager, he would get so mad at himself that he would hit himself hard with his own fists and tell his mother on the computer that he used for a mouth that he didn't want to live anymore. He was sure that God didn't like what was inside of him any more than he did. He always loved Mr. Rogers, though, and now, even when he was 14 years old, he watched The Neighborhood whenever it was on. And the boy's mother sometimes thought that Mr. Rogers was keeping her son alive. She and the boy lived together in a city in California. And although she wanted very much for her son to meet Mr. Rogers, she knew that he was far too disabled to travel all the way to Pittsburgh. So she figured he'd never meet his hero. Until one day, she learned through a special foundation designed to help children like her son that Mr. Rogers was coming to California, and that after he visited the gorilla named Coco, he was coming to meet her son. At first, the little boy was very nervous simply by the thought that Mr. Rogers was going to visit him. In fact, he was so nervous that when Mr. Rogers did visit, he got mad at himself and he began hating himself and hitting himself, and his mother had to take him into another room and talk to him. Mr. Rogers didn't leave, though. He wanted something from the boy. And Mr. Rogers never leaves when he wants something from somebody. He just waited patiently. And when the boy came back, Mr. Rogers talked to him. And then he made his request. He said, "I would like you to do something for me. Would you do something for me?" On his computer, the boy answered yes. He would do anything for Mr. Rogers. So then Mr. Rogers said, "I would like you to pray for me. Will you pray for me?" And now the boy didn't know how to respond. He was thunderstruck. Thunderstruck means that you can't talk because something has happened that's as sudden and as miraculous and maybe as scary as a bolt of lightning, and all you can do is listen to the rumble. The boy was thunderstruck because nobody ever talked to him like that. Nobody had ever asked him for something like that, ever. The boy had always been prayed for. The boy had been the object of a prayer, and now he was being asked to pray for Mr. Rogers. And although at first he didn't know if he could do it, he said he'd try. And ever since then, he keeps Mr. Rogers in his prayers and doesn't talk about wanting to die anymore because he figures Mr. Rogers is close to God. And if Mr. Rogers likes him, that must mean God likes him too. Just a profound story there about Mr. Rogers and the choices that he made and how he spoke to people, how he treated people, how he decided to be kind and make the kindest choice.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. And I was curious, is there any kind of research being done on niceness and leadership or niceness and performance in the business setting by, the business schools or, Harvard Business Review? Is anybody doing that kind of research?
It's a great question. And to be honest, I don't know off the top of my head, but what I would recommend is, and somebody who is near and dear to so many hearts, and that would be Brené Brown. Brené is obviously just such an amazing author and speaker, and podcaster now as well. And part of her sweet spot is research. And so she does do a lot of research into this type of thing and into, the use of empathy and leadership. So I would recommend Brené Brown's work to refer to any studies, off the top of my head. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, Thanks, Eric. That's a great question, Eric.
Yeah.
There's a piece on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation that's the business case for kindness, and they mention a few studies. There's a 2016 study from PwC, from their CEO survey, that finds that kindness increases employee commitment to the organization. It eliminates communication barriers. It minimizes negative competition among staff and strengthens relationships with business partners and investors. And there's probably at least a half dozen other studies on that page as well. What I'll do, Eric, is I will put that in the show notes on timeless.zealous.com. And for anyone who is a premium subscriber to the Timeless and Timely newsletter, I will be posting this podcast episode to the newsletter along with links from the show, including to Dave's sites and that Chamber of Commerce study. It looks like we have a question coming from Matt. Matt, welcome to Timeless Leadership.
Hi, Scott and Dave, and hi, Eric, as well, and everyone listening. Just had a quick question for our host and also our guest speaker today. What, in each of your own perspectives, is your best tip or your number one tip for fostering kindness in every relationship and person that you deal with? In your working lives, in your personal lives, just across the board.
Dave, what do you think? What's your tip for what you do with every relationship that is that you want kindness or niceness based at the core?
Yeah, and it's a great question, Matt. I think, and I mentioned the word empathy, and I think empathy, if we can all lead with empathy, the world would be a lot better place. And again, that's putting yourself in the shoes of anybody that you're interacting with, whether it's online or offline, in person, whatever. It's really just thinking what they might be going through. I think a lot of the negativity that we run into, especially on social these days, I think taking a step back and thinking like, especially when you hear negative stories or sensationalist news stories and things like that, is just pause and think, why am I getting this information and what is it all about and what's the purpose? So putting yourself in the shoes could be like in an empathetic way, but also in a way just to study the information and where it's coming from. I've been a big fan of like Noam Chomsky's work, and I read Manufacturing Consent when I was a kid, so I know I'm kind of getting into sort of the misinformation and disinformation campaigns and things that take place online. But I think it's similar to even just a misunderstanding with a colleague, because if you stop, pause, as we talked about a little bit here today, and then put yourself in the shoes of that person or that organization to decide like what's in it for them. Why are they approaching this topic in this way? You can kind of pause and reflect on that, and that can stop you from either retweeting a piece of misinformation or sensationalist news or whatever. And it can also stop you from responding in a negative way to somebody who says something that pushes your buttons. I think it's very important to always pause and put yourself in the shoes of the person. That doesn't mean that they're not wrong. They could be wrong. There are jerks out there as well. Absolutely. But I think it's important. And I think a lot of the negative stuff that we come across these days comes from a background of fear. And so even thinking about why they're saying what they're saying and why, what could be causing them fear, I think is often causes some of the stuff that I'm talking about. So, Matt, where are you based?
So yeah, guys, I'm actually based in Dublin, Ireland. I came from a communications background, so I have studied, a multiple discipline course, ranging from production of content right through to public relations, which I'm sure Scott can, speak to for hours on end. And also just in general, kind of the theory of content as well. As you mentioned, Noam Chomsky and a whole bunch of other great people that you can gain so much insight from on those areas. So I've been studying this for quite some time, and to hear it brought out into meta-level values like kindness and empathy and active listening and things like that, it's super cool.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and another key thing is to when you are speaking with people or corresponding with people from other cultures or other backgrounds or other languages, is to make sure that the language you're choosing is clear. And I will very quickly share a story of my first time in Dublin. And I went to a pub, as you do, and I was by myself, and I met two guys there who, I quickly learned that the Irish are very quick to welcome newcomers. And so I had a few pints with these guys, and at the end of the night, probably more than a few, but at the end of the night, we were on the sidewalk outside of the pub, and they're saying, Dave, you should come out with us tomorrow night if you're still going to be in Dublin before you move on to your next destination. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. And then his friend, who hadn't talked quite as much that night, said, yeah, we'll have some good crack. And I paused and I thought, what? And he's like, yeah, we'll have good crack. And I'm like, and I was kind of dumbfounded. And then his friend's like, no, he means like, we'll have a good time. And I'm like, but, I'm not into that. And what I realized, of course, and for those listening who don't understand what the word crack is, it's an Irish word for having a good time, having a laugh, having conversations, having a good crack, good crack. And so I learned that way. So yeah, so language is also something. I have plenty of other stories of that. By the way, Matt, I lived in Galway, Ireland for a couple of years, which is how I ended up living in Nashville, Tennessee, is I met my American wife in Galway, of all places. So small world.
Yeah, that's super awesome. Scott, I might turn it over to you if you have any thoughts, or maybe you want to wrap up. I'm not too sure.
Thank you, Matt. Glad you're here. Thanks for that question. And Dave, you remind us that, as Oscar Wilde put it, the UK and America are two countries who are separated by a common language. Powerful reminder there. My advice, Matt, is much more tactical than Dave's, and it's, again, a very simple kind of gesture, but it speaks volumes. I try to create and send out as many personalized communications as I can. And I'm not talking about the form letter kind of thing where it's dear first name and your first name gets put in, Matt. I'm talking about handwritten letters. I'm talking about, taking the time to really spend time, like Dave said, the catch-up part of networking, right? It's that personalization part. And Dave is a recipient of some of my handwritten notes as well.
Yeah.
In this day and age, particularly when everything is digital, something physical, like a handwritten note, really stands out, and it makes people feel very special. And Mr.
Absolutely.
Our friend Mr. Rogers there, he used to get so much fan mail, and yet he would take the time. He'd get up early, and he would take the time every single day to write notes back to everyone who wrote to him. He was that invested in those relationships. So I think that really matters. It looks like we have Courtney who wants to come up. So Courtney, I'm going to bring you up to the stage. I think this is our last time, our last question that we'll have an opportunity for. So Courtney, you'll get the last word before we officially go out and thank Dave.
Well, I better make it good then. Hopefully it'll be
No pressure.
No pressure. And I don't know that other people can relate to this part as much as I do, or that they might for different reasons. But I know for me, like some of the things that you were discussing regarding, first of all, just like being knowledgeable about the person, like, like, remember their name or whatever, or, be engaged, like look them in the eye and that kind of stuff. Some of that can be difficult for me in my case because I'm profoundly deaf. I have a cochlear implant in one ear and a hearing aid in the other ear. So, I may not be making eye contact with them. I'm probably reading their lips. I, have a hard time remembering people's names because even when I hear them, I don't trust that I heard them right. So I do a lot of it like, hey, or sometimes I know, like I had like 11 years of speech therapy, like in school and privately. So the whole, the tone of my voice, I don't necessarily always know what the tone of my voice might come off like. So I just wonder if there are alternative ways that I can make sure that I'm conveying that through other strategies to kind of compensate and make sure like the message doesn't get lost. I don't come across a different way than what I'm intending.
It's a great question, Courtney, and thank you. A friend of mine, Scott Rouse, just wrote a book, which is fantastic. He is a body language expert and not some self-proclaimed expert. Like, he is the guy that the FBI call for interrogations. Like, or one of the guys, I guess. But he is just brilliant at body language, at reading body language. And so I would encourage you to take a look out for his book. It's on Amazon and all the usual places. Scott Rouse, Rouse. But one of the caveats he has in the book that he mentions a few times is, there are body language things that we do. like his point to it is that you can combine different reading different aspects of body language to get a better idea. So the point is, the caveat is that just one move, like crossing the arms, doesn't necessarily mean the person is, reserved or doesn't want to hear from you. They could just be cold. So it's combining different readings from body language. So I hope that helps. Scott, I know you've written about with like your experiences with tinnitus and some other things. So I will pass the mic to you too.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a hearing disability. I wear hearing aids. It doesn't completely compensate for it, and it doesn't bring my hearing up to full scale. So there are times when it might seem like I'm ignoring people or like I'm disinterested, and it's not. It's just that either I haven't heard or I can't hear because it's a noisy environment. And the technology is improving over time, thank goodness. And now we have so many different methods of communicating. When I was a resident assistant in college, I had a student who lived on my floor who was profoundly deaf. And he would call me on the phone every once in a while. And he had the teletype operator who, he had the terminal in his room, and he would type it out. And then the operator would read it to me, and then I would respond to the operator, and then she would type back to him. It was a very clunky way of doing things, especially when you consider all the technology we have at hand now. But it gave me great empathy for people with hearing disabilities because there's so much nuance in sound. There's so many things that we don't pick up on. And to me, observing the deaf community, it's a very isolating way of having to live. There are all kinds of disabilities that isolate people. But to me, what I've seen with deafness, sound is such an intimate part of how we communicate with each other. And there are so many subtleties that happen that, it really takes an extra effort to go and make sure we are over communicating or being explicitly clear about what we would like to get across when we are dealing with people who have hearing disabilities. So it's a powerful lesson. So Courtney, thank you for bringing that up. And Dave, to your point earlier when you were talking to Matt, it's really about understanding our common language and where we're from, and geographically and culturally. This all comes into the mix. Really, it comes down to understanding other people and making choices based on what you know about them. Dave Delaney, you can find him at davedelaney.me. All sorts of stuff there, including Dave's Nice newsletter, his Nice podcast, his book about networking. Make sure you check that out. We'll have the show notes and the recorded version of this program in the Timeless and Timely newsletter tomorrow for our premium subscribers. Dave, any last words before we sign out?
Be nice.
Be nice. I love it. Well, Dave, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Nice Podcast. Theme music provided by Alistair Crystal at alistaircrystal.ca. Hey, if you enjoyed the conversation, please take a moment to leave us a review. The links are in the description. I'll have more of that soon. Did you know that new subscribers of the Nice Maker email newsletter receive a free copy of my little ebook, Improve with Improv? Each Friday, I share nice stories, tools, tips, and much more, and you can grab it now from nicemaker.co or by clicking the link in the episode description. I'm Dave Delaney. Take care and be nice.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Kevin Hunt is one half of a great podcast called Hansen and Hunt on MPN. Kevin, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Hansen and Hunt is a place for marketers and communicators for brands, companies, and organizations of all kinds to stay on top of industry news and trends. Eric Hansen and I discuss things that make them think, things that help them do their jobs better, things that help them hopefully show up smarter with the boss. We are a monthly show, and we've been at it since 2014.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Their preferred podcast app, of course, or head to hansonandhunt.com or follow our show at marketingpodcast.net.
You heard him, folks. Go subscribe.